I just saw Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and now I'm going to talk about it and give a spoiler-free review. Now, the Ant-Man films haven't exactly been the heavy-hitting franchise of all of these other series in the MCU, but I personally have really enjoyed what they've done with these Ant-Man films. They've been the most light-hearted Marvel movies, and that's saying something. And overall, I think have been great comedic superhero fun for all audiences. While the trailers here promise some of that formula for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, they also promise something a little bit more. A story with major consequences and relevance to the big picture of the Marvel Universe going forward, as opposed to the meandering, somewhat inconsequential Phase 4 films that we saw. In this film, things are looking up for Scott Lang. You know, he's got the title of being an Avenger, helped save the universe, he's become a best-selling author, everything's looking great. Until him, along with Hope, Hank, Janet, and his now teenage daughter Cassie, are plunged unexpectedly into the quantum realm, where they must find a way out and encounter a villain who's the baddest MF the MCU has seen since that purple guy in Infinity War and Endgame. Now, the movie wastes no time in getting to the whole quantumania of the story. Essentially, the whole film takes place in the quantum realm, and immediately, that's where the weird factor kicks in. Not just from all the quantum shenanigans and the scenery, but for me, how familiar the setting looked to other Disney properties that we've seen. The immediate comparison that I saw, and I saw this from the trailers too, was Strange World. Y'all remember Strange World, that Disney flop from a few months ago? No? Well, me neither. I never saw it. But I did see the trailers, and immediately when I saw the trailers for that movie, saw the trailers for Quantumania, it's like, wow, this looks very similar. And it does. When it comes to the scenery, just the look, the color scheme, the kind of weird factor, even some of the creatures that I saw in that trailer and saw in this movie, looks very much like a live-action version of that movie. Star Wars is the other comparison. I mean, there's a shot in this movie that looks almost exactly, pretty much exactly, like the pod racing scenery from The Phantom Menace. And the creatures that you see in here look like you could just drop them in any of the cantina scenes, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I wouldn't say that these are really flaws with the movie, but it's stuff you do start to notice really when the whole quantum starts to get going. Through all the weirdness of the film, especially in that first half, the film still keeps true to that Ant-Man identity of being lighthearted and fun like the first two films are. And that's in large part due to Peyton Reed, the director of this film, staying on as he directed the first two films. So that was good that this film was able to keep that identity. Character-wise, pre-all Kang stuff, the most interesting thing I think is going on here is seeing the relationship now between Scott and his now teenage daughter Cassie. You know, that father-daughter relationship between the two can be described as, I guess, adorable in the first two films because Cassie was obviously younger. Things are obviously different now that Cassie is a teen. But I still love seeing those two in this dynamic, and Scott's a great dad, and he still has that love for his daughter. So that's really the heart of that film. And there's obviously a new dynamic here too, with Cassie having her own pimp suit that she brings into the quantum realm. I also thought through all these quantum shenanigans initially going in that Hank Pym and Janet would get kind of lost, but both of them had a very solid part to play here, especially Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet, who Michelle Pfeiffer, she still looks great. But as for the character, she has some great story in this and has some very big, sizable story revelations, and it was fascinating to see what her time in the quantum realm was like. Let's just say it wasn't quite as lonely as the first two films made it seem. Out of all of the main returning Ant-Man cast, the only one that I feel like gets kind of the short end here is Hope. The most fascinating stuff she has going on is her life pre-quantum adventure in this. You know, she has a lot of big stuff going on. But once the whole quantum stuff gets going, she doesn't really have a whole lot to do story-wise or character-wise in this. I mentioned returning Ant-Man cast. Unfortunately, that does not include the ex-cons that we saw in the first two films, which is Luis, Michael Pena's character, T.I.'s character, and that other Russian guy played by Polka Dot Man. It's unfortunate because those guys were really hilarious in the first two films. I love their usage. They were in it just enough. I mean, Luis with his stories, he was hilarious. And that other Russian guy that was saying like Baba Yaga. Those guys were pretty funny. It was unfortunate that they didn't have a role to play in this, but that's how the story played out. So the first half of this film is really just about the weird factor. Seeing all this abstract scenery and characters in the quantum realm. Can't say that I loved all of it. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. The touches here and there was just kind of like, well, all right, whatever. But thankfully, that Ant-Man lighthearted humor of the first two films kept me attached. Also here, when it comes to weird factor, we got to see the MCU debut of the MODOK, one of the weirdest MCU sort of villains you'll ever see. He's a character only possible to see in this kind of like weird factor that you got going on in this film. Won't spoil too much about the character for those who don't know exactly what's going on with him story-wise or character-wise. But there was some fun to be had with him here, and his kind of character fits perfect for sort of the kind of lighthearted Ant-Man tone that we've seen throughout these films. So through the first half of this film, you're just sitting back waiting and watching all this weird abstract quantum weirdness happen. And then Kang happened. The second half of the film is the Kang the Show. Kang the Conqueror Show. Now, this is really sort of his showcase in terms of being that next big bad in the MCU. The character was obviously first showcased at the end of season 1 of Loki, but this is our first full look at the character, obviously in a movie, and just seeing more in depth of what he is all about. Now, this is all about fully seeing the character, and most importantly, why he'll be a major problem for the Avengers going forward if he can carry out his plan. Jonathan Majors here as Kang is excellent. Jonathan Majors is an excellent actor. This guy's on the rise to superstardom right now, and he was great as Kang and all the stuff that came with that role. Is able to pull off the multiple personalities and sides to the character. Part of him being intimidation, the rage, being powerful, being calm, cool, and collected, and even a charming side to him, which I initially fell for, even though I didn't know what was coming. Now, those who are more casual viewers of comic book movie fare are probably going to get lost in the grand scheme of his plans, because it is a plan that is just like beyond reality, even beyond what Thanos was thinking. In the end, though, all you got to know is that he lives up to the Conqueror part of his name, and you should know that he is a dude not to be fucked with. There are some nuance and depth to his story that is teased but not quite fully shown. Hopefully more of that gets shown in his later appearances, and that will take the character to the next level in terms of having that Thanos level of depth. That was the thing that took Thanos to the next level, was the level of depth to this character. We don't quite see that with Kang just yet, and by the end he does become more of just coming like, oh my god, is there any humanity to this guy? But we'll see if there's more of that going forward for him in his next appearances in the Avengers films. Kang's presence, though, shifts the film to a noticeably more darker tone. Infinitely more darker than the first two films had. This makes the film more of a grand epic. The first two Ant-Man films had the identity of fun heist films. Not at all the case here. This movie takes a grandiose approach to its final section, to where you get a pretty big, sizable final battle section at the end of this film. And in this section, the final battle reminded me again of Star Wars. In this case, The Rise of Skywalker. I'm not talking about so much in sort of a negative comparison way when you bring up that movie, but in terms of the final battle, just really sort of the scenery, the rebellion, even a moment of dialogue in a moment are straight out of that movie, which that movie itself took from Endgame. But I did really enjoy the rise of stakes here. It felt grandiose and had the feeling of a finale. Which, who knows if this will be the final Ant-Man. It's not obviously confirmed as of this moment. But if it is, they certainly went out with a bang in terms of scale, spectacle, and villain. Villain is the thing that will get your attention here. For me, a great antagonist can always elevate a film in terms of the tension, stakes, and just your level of engagement in terms of, dude, what the hell's going to happen? And that's what I felt for the most part here. 7.5 out of 10 for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Despite whatever shortcomings there were here in terms of familiarity, borrowing from other movies and whatnot you want to bring up, you gotta see the movie for Kang to see what this guy's gonna do in the MCU going forward. And that's something you wouldn't have been able to say about a lot of Phase 4, which I mentioned was just kind of inconsequential and meandering, but this is the start of Phase 5, and hey, it's a Marvel movie. You're going to see it. So I would say see it for those reasons, but the movie as a whole, I did enjoy overall. At this point, though, Marvel movies, especially where this current saga, the multiverse saga, is going, it's really only for people that are going to be fully engaged in this kind of storyline going forward. You know, stuff like this for just sort of casual comic book movie viewers that I mentioned earlier, this stuff really isn't for them. Because as they sort of tease with Loki season 1 and what you see in this movie, this story is going to get pretty crazy and it might end up losing a whole lot of people. But in terms of Kang as a villain, he's one that I definitely want to watch because I think he did make a solid impression in this movie. So that's my review of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. For what it's worth, I did see the movie in IMAX, and I'm guessing that did improve the experience for me when it came to the visuals, the final battle, and those scenes when Ant-Man goes Giant Man. It really does feel like he's right in front of you. So that was pretty cool. But whether or not you think it's worth it to go pay for IMAX, which definitely is not cheap anymore, that's for you to decide. So that'll do it for this review of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.